Alright, time for a new tier list. Now, I'll note before I begin that I actually went back and re-edited these tier lists that basically had the imperfections in them. So if I go to say the C&C Tiberian Dawn list here, and we'll just basically look at it here, we'll just, hit the reset button here for a moment. You'll notice that basically knob 1 basically now has no A in there, so that's just a minor imperfection but one basically fixed. I also went and made sure it's basically 1 and 2 here for the 97, so that's been changed as well. That of course meant I had to be delete the list, remake the entire list, interpret the list, all that fun stuff, but whatever. Today, I'm going to be doing a tier list for the units of C&C. So, let's get the music going. And I'll get the music down. Did that wrong. If you don't actually have yourself in a main menu for that, your game's gonna keep playing in the background, by the way. Not sure anything would happen since it's got triggers that mission, but whatever. And yes, I went back to basically play C&C Nod 97 too. It's a lot harder than I give it credit for, but whatever. Alright, so the C&C units of the original Tiberian Dawn. Now, I basically combined these lists for both the Nod and the GDI factions into one. I didn't really feel there's enough difference between the two units to really have separate lists for both. There's a couple shared units like the minigunner, the rocketeer guy here, engineer, harvester, MCV, but they don't really do that much different for each side, I don't think, so we'll just include them on the same list. Alright, so we basically have to start off with the C&C minigunner. Now, I never really thought much of the C&C minigunner. I always found that he's basically really weak and terrible at everything until you get a Nod opposite and stuff like that, but even then he's still kind of weak and terrible. So the thing about the C&C minigunner, and this is basically versus all the other games in the C&C franchise, I always found that this guy had too little range basically to work with. You basically have grenadiers that have more range than him. You have rocketeers that have more range than him. But this guy sort of runs around and gets right next to vehicles and stuff like that to basically fire at them. So that's just asking me to run over, and this causes other issues and stuff like that. He's not terrible, as I basically said, because he's useful for rushing obelisks and other stuff like that, but he definitely could be better. Alright, the Grenadier. So the Grenadier is basically a lobbing unit, especially in the hands of the AI. This guy can basically lob his little grenades over walls. He can basically hit a small group of units. He has to be careful not to be next to other units himself, because he'll basically blow up though. So there's a little bit of drawback for him, but that's actually shared with the flamethrowers and I believe the chem troopers too, perhaps, but whatever. Anyhow, the thing about the Grenadier is that versus say the infantry, the rifle infantry or the minigun rather, this guy is basically all about being a better infantry unit overall. He's not terrible. He can actually kill tanks if he has enough firepower to do so. He's cost effective for what he basically does. He's overall really good. Then we have the rocket soldier, and this guy's excellent. So the rocket soldier has a very basic sort of principle to being used, and that's basically to take down armored vehicles when you basically maybe have a deficit of anti-armor vehicles yourself. He can also be used against air units and stuff like that, but I never really found anti-air to be that great for these units. You can't really have good anti-air at all basically in C&C games, but whatever. Anyhow, I've always found this guy to be more useful than the air infantry, just for a simple reason that even in the late game you can still have a use for him. So a great infantry unit overall. Alright, we got ourselves the Flame Trooper. And we're going to throw this guy basically into mediocre. So, the Flame Trooper is, interesting. In that he's basically similar to like, the Grenadier. He has a far bigger, blast radius with his, flamethrower, but he has to get a lot closer to the Grenadier as well. And what I really like about the Flame Trooper, or Flamethrower unit, is that, basically, he's only a little bit more expensive than, the Grenadier. But if you basically have, the AI basically saying a clump of units basically at you, you can basically, do a whole lot of damage basically to, those, units of, the Flame Trooper. And possibly, tip the balance in your favor. This is opposed to, say, the Grenadier, who basically, very much basically will, not hit as much, units as, the Flame Trooper will. And his, damage, spread out will not do as much, basically, as the Flame Trooper, because close to, the unit he's hitting, the Grenadier does a lot of damage, but the farther out he basically goes, the less damage he does, which is basically unlike the Flame Trooper, which basically always does, the full amount of damage, overall. If he hits with the Flame Trooper, he gets his full damage. Now, I am putting him a little bit lower, though, because he does have friendly fire basically enabled, and it's very possible for this guy to basically burn himself or other Flame Troopers, which makes him a little bit, less desirable. But he's not bad overall, so, mediocre, but whatever. Alright, we're going to put next to him the Chem Trooper. Now, I haven't really used the Chem Trooper that much, but I've always found, the Chem Trooper to be kind of well, let's just put it this way. To build a Chem Trooper, you have to build, the Temple of Nod for a Nod faction. And that's a few steps up from, the Flame Trooper. It basically requires you just to build, a Ham Nod. The thing about the Chem Trooper is that he's basically useful against both infantry and, vehicles and structures and, everything else. But to basically get him, you're basically having to, build, very far up the tech tree. And at that point in time, you're basically able to, tons of vehicles and stuff like that that are just far better to, use. If there's basically, infantry only type of areas, this might be, a great sort of, character to basically have. I don't understand, Empire Battle for Dune, you basically have, infantry cover and stuff like that basically the infantry can enter, and then, they can, run around in it, but without that sort of, ability, basically, Tiberian Dawn, it's really not that great to really care about, so, yeah. Mediocre, this guy. Alright, and then we get to the Commando. In a way, the Commando is very similar to, the Chem Trooper, because he's basically, at the top, of the tech tree, so to speak. But unlike the, Chem Trooper, this guy can actually, do a lot of, interesting stuff, instantly blow up, structures, snipe, infantry, instantly for a kill. He's got some good stuff basically going for him. So, I think I'll basically consider the Commando to be laudable. I'll note that the only reason I basically put him below, the Rocket Soldier there is just because, in practicality, you're not really worried about, infantry that much in this game, I don't think. You can, use the Commando basically, sort of thin out, the infantry, but really be better off using, say, a rocket, launcher or a flame tank, basically, to wipe out infantry, when you basically have access to them, basically, as well. He is, a little bit better, though, just for a simple reason that he basically has those C4 charges, but it's also worth keeping in mind that basically in, the original Tiberian Dawn, when this guy basically blows up a building, that building basically, infantry and occupants and stuff like that, they can still escape, and they will, attack the Commando and, injure him, so it is a bit of an issue, basically, to say the least. Alright, and finally we have the Engineer. Now, I think I'm going to put the Engineer basically up to Excellent. Possibly. No, I think I'll make him laudable. Alright, so the Engineer is really interesting in, Command & Conquer Tiberian Dawn, because he can basically instantly take over structures. You can also, fix your own buildings and, that, all sort of jazz basically your own base, but the thing about this guy is basically all about capturing enemy structures. And once you basically capture an enemy structure, you basically build around it, you can basically, use it, you can basically, sell it. All, good stuff basically to, so recuperate your cost base for using the Engineer in the first place. The only real problems of the Engineer by way itself is just for a simple reason that he basically really requires you to be using him in APC in order to get him over long distances, or you're basically going to take 5 or 6 minutes waiting for this guy to cross the the ends of the map because he goes so slow. I always found that using Engineer for the Nod faction is just a chore, because if the GDI faction is basically all the way over on the other side of the map, he has to run all the way over to the GDI base from a a long distance. And on top of that, basically you also have to worry about like the guard towers, the advanced guard towers that are like anti-infantry capable, and everything else that like is anti-infantry capable in like the GDI faction. They are great units though when you actually capture the structure though, so you have to basically give him credit for what he basically does. So yeah, he's good. Alright, so the Harvester. I think we'll say the Harvester is basically just mediocre in this game. So the thing about the GDI, or not GDI, but the Tiberian Dawn Harvester, both GDI and like Nod, this guy doesn't like self-regenerate like the Harvester is basically like further games, and he doesn't have like any like special gizmos to sort of defend himself when he's being attacked. He can like run over infantry, and he can like take quite a few shots if like needed, but he's not really great to Harvesters for like doing anything besides harvesting. And if he does get damaged and like destroyed, then that's basically a big hit to your economy too, right? So he's got drawbacks too for like what he's basically worth. He is integral to your like army, but he's nothing special as a thing. Also, for a fact, by the way, to throw it out there, if you want to repair the Harvester, it takes a lot of creds basically to do so because this guy has so many like hit points to be repaired, and it's such an expensive unit basically to work with. So yeah, there is that as well. Alright, the MCV. I think this will be the first I'm going to be put in a terrible rank. So, I'll note that the MCV is obviously like an integral unit for like building a base and stuff like that, but it costs 5,000 creds basically to build. And I never really found that it's really all that great basically to build like a second MCV in any like Tiberian Dawn mission or in like multiplayer or anything like that. It's just too expensive to like sort of get another MCV off the ground. Outside of that, by the way, I'll note the construction yard itself basically in like C&C is also really weak because they like can't take that many hits versus like the NCV basically in like future games. And the NCV itself is also not that heavily armored either, so if it takes hits, it's gonna go down pretty fast. I really wish it was like a better unit than what it basically is, but it is what it is for like building up in our base. So I suppose like it's supposed to be viable, but it's just like maybe far too weak in my opinion for what it's basically worth for like building a base. All right, so that's basically like all like that stuff out of the way. Let's get into like the real proper stuff of like ranking this game. And that's gonna be the Knob Buggy to start off with. So where to throw the Knob Buggy? I think we'll say a Knob Buggy is basically a laudable unit. And that's actually worth knowing by the way. Note that I basically changed like this from admirable to laudable, just to make this a little bit like in line with the other like stuff here for words, the length for this word, but whatever. Anyhow, back to the Buggy. So I'll note that I never really fought much of a Knob Buggy because I always found they were kind of weak. Essentially, the Knob Buggy is like 300 like creds basically to like throw a unit that can like attack our infantry, but for the most part, the thing about the Knob Buggy is that like what do you really need a machine gun on like a little like platform basically all that for? It's not that great for scouting. You have other fast units that can basically explore around if you want to, and it also like doesn't really serve that much purpose basically against like GDI because they don't really have like a whole lot of like infantry you have to really be scared of. I mean, you have like the Grenadier and stuff like that, which should be like scary, but the Grenadier is going to do a lot of damage to the Buggy anyways, and you'll have like the Flame Tank eventually to fight them soon, so there's that too. But whatever, it is worth knowing that basically like it does have its purpose basically like mowing down infantry like early on, and if you have like enough of these basically like, combined with like rocket bikes, they're fairly cheap to basically manufacture and they can like provide some early like rushing capabilities, so they do well. At least for what they're, aim to do, I guess. And now we get to the GDI Humvee. So I'll say this is basically also a laudable unit. Alright, so the GDI Humvee is basically a little bit stronger than like the Knob Buggy. And its main claim to fame is the fact that like, it basically just has like, a little bit more like, fighting power than like the Buggy, and like, won't like die as fast, I guess we'll say. It's still got to take like an instant hit to like an Albus and die immediately from it, and it's only got like again like infantry like gun. But the thing about the GDI like Humvee versus like the Knob Buggy, basically I'll note for a GDI they don't have a whole lot of fast units like the Nod does. So the GDI Humvee basically it's basically like the basic scout early on. You can basically get like the APCs as well, but this guy is basically a lot more affordable if you want to just do some basic scouting. So he at least serves that purpose as well. You don't really want to use him for rushing the enemy base because you don't really have any fast units to sort of keep up with him. So no attack bikes or recon bikes basically not basically has, but he's okay for what he's basically worth for GDI. So yeah, he's laudable. He does his job. He's fine. And then we get down to the APC. So let's throw this guy basically up to excellent. So the chief problem I basically have with infantry is the fact that they're basically slow, and even though they're very useful in mass, they're very hard to sort of position get into place when you basically want to be where you want them. That could be the engineers basically into enemy structures. That could be getting an attack force basically into an enemy base of infantry. The APC is really useful for clarifying that issue because he can basically transfer 5 infantry a vast distance really fast. And there's basically the almost engineer rush. There's basically dropping in a bunch of attacking units to just blow up their base. Say you take if you capture say a ham nod as GDI and train 5 flametroopers, that's gonna be devastating basically enemy base pretty fast. So yeah, he's got some uses for the APC. He's a little bit better for scouting than the Humvee, by the way, because he has a little bit more sight range. He has heavy armor, so he can actually take some big hits if he needs to. So overall, it's an excellent unit, I think. So yeah, let's roll up an excellent. All right, the recon bike, laudable. Now I note that the recon bike has an infamous reputation on multiplayer, but I never really played multiplayer, so I'm just gonna basically view it from the single player mode. The thing about the recon bike is that it's actually really useful to get some extra firepower in when you're basically attacking an enemy base in process, because this guy can basically be built and fly right over to the battlefield to get to the enemy base and start attacking with your other main forces. So the thing about the recon bike is that it's basically all about speed, and that speed is basically very useful to do a whole lot of things, even if you're playing in single player. He can also be used in hunter packs basically or wolf packs basically to take out harvesters. He can also run around the map cutting our units if you need him to. There's lots of uses for the recon bike. The only real downside of this guy is the fact that he's basically really expensive for a very frail unit, but that seems like a minor thing to say the least. All right, into the tanks we go, and we're gonna start with the light tank, I guess. So now, I think I'm going to basically, maybe take some flack for putting it this low, but we're going to say the Nod light tank is efficient. Now, I won't say the light tank is basically a bad unit for basically what it does. It basically has heavy armor, it has a turret, and it can do a lot of damage basically to enemy heavy armor and stuff like that. But the thing about the Nod light tank is that versus say the GDI's medium tank or mammoth tank for that matter, he's just so inefficient for basically fighting those units. And he's basically fairly expensive versus those units as well, because they're only a little bit more expensive to build, and they have a vast amount more HP basically than this light tank here. He's also pretty slow, by the way, the light tank, so he doesn't really have any sort of speed to sort of make up for his deficiencies in being a fairly heavy iron unit, but not as heavy like the R units. And Not basically has a whole lot of other units to sort of work with that sort of counterbalance GI's armor threats and stuff like that in this guy. There's also the fact that if you want basically heavy iron units, there's also gonna be the flame tank and that can basically take up base defense and stuff like that. So he has a use if you need another heavy unit that's got a bit of range to him, but not as much basically as he could be, I think. So yeah, he's a little bit deficient. Could be a little stronger, I think. And that brings us to the medium tank, which is an excellent unit. Alright, so the medium tank basically versus the light tank is no contest. The medium tank is going to win. And basically compared to a lot of the Nods units, the medium tank will just fighting around basically any of them. So flame tank, medium tank will just blast through it. Stealth tank, medium tank will still probably blast through it, even though it'll take probably a lot of damage. Basically, think about like the medium tanks that you can build up like a nice little clump of them and just like just roll over an enemy base real fast with them. And they're fairly like easy to build because all you need is a war factory. So there's that too. They're also like as fast as like a light tank, so they can basically chase down them as well. Overall, it's just a great unit. There's nothing really like to disparage about the medium tank. So yeah, it's an excellent unit. Not so much the MAF tank though, I guess, for Tiberian Dawn. So let's just throw this one in mediocre. So the GDI MAF tank is basically like their like top tier, top premium like tank, and it basically like combines like 2 turrets on like a big platform with lots of HP. It also has like it's like MAF Tusk missiles, but basically they're kind of wonky and they have to be like require a lot of min-max to basically use them. So there's that basically consider about them. But anyhow, the MAF tank is basically a really slow moving platform of death, and it basically works for what basically like provides to like the player like in the late game. If you build like a bunch of them and send them to an enemy base, you can basically wipe it out pretty easily. But it does have issues basically in say like the hard mode, for example, which I basically played, because if you find like the enemies basically selling like their structures and stuff like that in order to like get funds because you basically damage their buildings, you'll basically find like an overwhelming amount of infantry basically to fight, and there's basically that the case to consider, because then you have to like max like rocketeers, all these like new infantry basically keep popping out. And then, of course, there's the fact that like the AI cheats, of course, so they build the structures right back real quick anyway. So there's that too. But whatever. Overall, I never really found like the MAF tank to be like a stellar unit, so it's mediocre to say the least. All right, the flame tank. The flame tank is. What can I say about the flame tank? I think I have to say it. It's a fantastic unit. So, note that they're not flame tank. It's basically got 2 mounted like flame turrets. It basically can like has like heavy armor, even though it's not as much as say like the not like light tank. And versus like everything that GD basically has structure wise, it will melt it. Advanced guard tower, this thing can melt it because it basically it's just like close range and it's like destroy it. Guard towers, like this regular like machine guns, they're going to basically resistant to like these like gunfire. Infantry just mows right down. Rocket launcher platforms and like other like APCs kills them pretty fast as well. This is a great unit, and I mean it does like what it does fantastically. It's just like the rocket soldier, except it's like meant for like infantry at close range, and close that range pretty damn fast. So yeah, fantastic unit. Not so much for the stealth tank though. The stealth tank is basically a very mediocre unit, much like the MAF tank. I found that the stealth tank can be useful, but they're really expensive to build, and they're also like not that damaging when they basically reveal themselves. How I basically like to use stealth tanks basically myself is to use them for like espionage and like, scouting out like fortifications and stuff like that, because nothing can basically see them unless they like to run into them, or they basically are infantry or a guard tower. But it can be useful to use like stealth tanks because you can actually like get some like hit and run on like harvesters, or like get into like their blind spots and attack them from like where you're basically not prepared to fight you, stuff like that. But yeah, I think I'd rather like is like not use like say like a bunch of flame tanks, mix of light tanks, and like maybe I like some artillery and like aim back to sort of like help out as well. So there's just that to throw out there. Speaking of artillery, I guess. Terrible. So, I want to note that the artillery units basically have like, Tiberian Dawn. I like the concept basically for like, not basically having this long range like, artillery unit that can basically outrange like, enemy structures and do a lot of damage to them and stuff like that. And I'm okay with the fact that it's basically inaccurate. But the thing about the artillery is that it doesn't have just enough range basically to like, clear the advanced guard tower in all situations. So, basically like the advanced guard tower, if you basically come like directly on it, the advanced guard tower is basically going to be able to attack the artillery, so there is that to sort of consider. Basically, it could have a little bit more range, and it could be just like a little bit like more capable of basically taking those basically out to make them like really stand out, I think. The other thing about the artillery, by the way, is that they're actually really slow, and if you're basically trying to attack like a mobile target, basically run around them, they won't fire at all because they basically need like time to sort of like calculate the position and basically fire at them. They don't basically just fire blind, basically, so to speak. So there is that to consider about them. I really want to like the the Nod artillery, but it is really into like Tiberian Sunday basically sort of like artillery. So yeah, that's basically that about it. So yeah, what can I say about it? It's terrible. Not so much for the rocket launcher though. The rocket launcher is basically laudable unit, I guess. So the rocket launcher is basically like it fires 2 missiles, which is basically useful against infantry, and that's basically like the main way you can basically deal with like clumps of not troops for the like GDI. To send like a couple of rocket launchers and it's like mow them down with those. It's not perfect though because like it's not really meant for killing infantry, but it can at least be used for that. What's really used for is basically like taking out structures, and I'll note that the rocket launcher basically fires pretty fast. Actually, you know what? I'm actually gonna knock this down to like mediocre because it does have like a big issue with the rocket launcher platform, and that it's very very weak. So if something basically is close to your rocket launcher and attacks it, it's going to kill it pretty fast. There is that to consider, but it's still like a very good unit, better than like the artillery, for example, because it's a lot more usable, and that's basically what I like about these like some of these units. They're basically how useful are they in like combat. Alright, the SSM, the Surface Missile Launcher. I do like the concept of this SSM, but I've always found it really slow, and I don't do enough damage, basically, so efficient. The thing about the SSM is that it basically can outrange basically anything on like GDI's side, so they're basically what I really wish artillery basically were. Except they don't do the damage basically really needed to sort of take out the the like enemy units and stuff like that. The thing with the SSM is that like it fires a missile, and that missile is basically gonna probably miss anything basically in that radius if you're like moving. And if they basically hit like a structure, then they don't really do enough damage to sort of like cave in the structure. So there's that too. If they did more damage, I basically like these, but they're just not great enough to basically do so. So yeah, deficient. All right, now we get into like the aircraft. We get the or not the longbow, but the Apache, I guess, for like Nod. And I think I was gonna do this for both these here, but I think we're gonna say mediocre and mediocre. So, well, now let's just knock down the Apache to deficient. So, I'm all about the aircraft I see in this game is I really don't think much like say the Orca or the Apache because the anti-air is basically like very powerful in terms of taking them out. I say this like about like the rocket soldier being like not the greatest thing for like knocking out the like aircraft, but that's basically because like you have to consider like the SAM site and like the advanced guard tower and other stuff like that. There's basically a lot of ways to take out aircraft in this game, and if you have like say like even they have tanks basically, they're gonna do a lot of damage to like helicopters like before they basically have a chance to get their payloads off. And I've always found that to become a nuisance for like using helicopters in like Tiberian Dawn. They're just like if there's basically like no anti-air units, then they can be like useful, but without like the armor basically to take up hits, they go down pretty damn fast. So there's that to consider. I do consider the Orca a little bit better though because it basically gets its payload off a little bit faster than like say like the Apache, which basically like, shoots a machine gun. But overall, they're like not that great really, to say the least. So mediocre and efficient, basically. Alright, we get to the base defenses, starting with the Nod turret. I think we'll say that Nod turret is very mediocre. So, I'll note the thing like about like Nod's base defense is that they're basically geared to being like anti-armor. And that's really useful against like GGI, which basically has like lots of like armored like units basically to fight against. The thing with the Nod turret versus say like the light tank is it also has like the ability to be repaired, so you can actually do as well. But it's not really a whole lot to say about the Nod turret. It basically is like it's a static base defense that can like basically put like stopgap the enemy for a little bit. It's not gonna be like too threatening to it. Eventually, like if you have a couple medium tanks coming at you, they're gonna like kill it pretty fast. But it's still like a fairly good defense at least, so it's not like terrible or anything. So yeah, mediocre. Alright, the Nod SAM site. I'm gonna say it's deficient. So while I do like say like anti-aircraft is like really powerful in this game, I'll note that the SAM site for like the Nod is just like kind of lacking just for one real reason. It's basically like over here, but the thing about the not sandstone is that basically isn't like, you know, very fast firing, and it's also like, you know, gonna have like that little issue where it basically goes back into the ground, back up out of the ground, basically to fight aircraft. Outside of like aircraft, then it's like fine because like, you know, it can basically like, you know, avoid damage from being like underground, but it's just like not that great for like, you know, a base defense for like against like, you know, air, unfortunately. So it works against the orcas and the Apaches, but they're not really the main threat. You're basically working with anti-air, so yeah, it's deficient to say the least. That can't be said for about the Opposite Light though. So the non-Opposite Light is basically an excellent defense, firing a massive like, you know, bolts of like laser energy to basically fry a target. It can instantly kill an infantry in one shot. It can basically do like, you know, a fair of damage basically to like the most powerful units like harvesters and mammoth tanks, and instantly kill like most light vehicles as well. The only real drawbacks basically like the, you know, the not opposite is that it like, you know, requires power in order to like, you know, be like on. So if you take out like, the enemy's like power supplies, then it's gonna be like go offline. And there's also a thing about the not opposite light that like, you know, if it's basically like a mob of like, you know, infantry basically coming at it, it's gonna be have a hard time picking through them because it doesn't have like that sort of anti-infantry capability, so to speak. It's made for armor, but you have other like, you know, aspects to work with, like the flame tank, for example, to sort of like make up for that. So there's that. You can also fire over walls, and that's a very like, you know, useful thing because you can actually like build walls around like your obelisk to like, you know, sort of defend it. So yeah, it's a fantastic ace defense. Does what it does and does it well. The GDI guard tower. While not terrible, it's very deficient. I've never really found like anti-infantry to be all that useful for like, you know, GDI. I realize that like, you know, Nod basically has like a fairly powerful like, you know, robust infantry core, but basically what you really need to like, you know, for like GDI is basically sort of like, you know, something to deal with their Nod like, you know, recon bikes and stuff like that. And the GDI like, you know, guard towers this does not cut it basically for them. It's not really the infantry you're basically worried about on like the Nod side, it's basically their vehicles. Like, you know, even a light tank basically will be like, you know, able to like knock this out pretty easily, so it's not that great really to like sort of like hold them off. Yeah, I have to say I think it could have been a little bit better like the GI's base defense here, so it's sufficient to say the least. It's just not useful. Same can't be said for the advanced guard tower though. For what the like GI's like advanced guard tower basically does, it's fairly laudable. I'll note that basically like, you know, a lot of like, you know, Nod's like units besides like say like the flame tank and light tank are like light armor, so this can basically tear through them pretty fast if it like, you know, gets hits on them. And it also basically fries infantry when it hits them as well. It's not perfect though, the advanced guard tower, because it also requires power, and it also has like that issue where if stuff gets really close to it, it basically can hit it as well. So there's that too. But overall, it's a laudable unit for what it does. So yeah, it's that. All right, and now we get to the walls. So I think I'm going to start off with by like putting this right here. So terrible. I don't think I really need to say why I think like, you know, the sandbag is terrible, because there's basically two issues with it. One is the simple fact that like, you know, sandbags basically require like, you know, 50 like credits basically to build, and they basically only require like, you know, one like, you know, shot basically to like take down. So the thing about the sandbags is they're basically supposed to be like useful to like, you know, stop enemies from like running over them, but the thing about them is that they're so easily destroyed that they're not like useful for that purpose. And then there's like sort of like an issue with like, you know, abusing them for like other purposes, which I'll try and not mention, but I'm sure people know what I'm basically talking about when I say sandbag trick. So yeah, there's that too. I'm not really like, you know, Tiberian Dawn is basically a very hard game, but I still don't like the idea of like having like abusive mechanics basically to sort of beat it. So terrible, destroy on the terrible. And I'm not for some reason basically in front of a chain link fence down here as well. It's not as like, you know, basically as you know, weak basically or fragile as like, you know, the like, you know, sandbag, but it still only takes 2 hits to go down. Basically, the thing about the chain link fence is that it is like, you know, a defense, I guess I'll say, but it's just not useful enough basically to sort of like stop enemies from like, you know, getting through it. So yeah, down it goes. All right, the concrete wall. Now, I'll note that the concrete wall it's a little bit more like, shall we say, like, durable than, say, like the other walls. You can take several shots sometimes to take them down. It also blocks shots from, like, say, like tanks and, like, other, like, sort of like direct based attacks like that. So is that going for a 2 against, like, say, like, defending your guard towers and stuff like that? And it's also fairly expensive at 100 credits basically per. So there's that going for as well. I like the idea of the concrete wall. It basically works for what it basically does, and I'm quite happy about it. So yeah, laudable like right there. All right, super weapons. So there's basically like 3 super weapons in this game. The airstrike is basically not really available in multiplayer, but the other ones basically are. So let's go through them. First, the iron strike. I'm gonna say the iron strike is probably like it's laudable. The thing about the iron strike is that basically for like the end game like sort of like super weapon, it does its job well enough. You can basically take out say like an obelisk like really fast with it, and it'll basically charge up again to like be used again basically if you want to, against whatever you want to. It could be a little more powerful I think basically in its blast and stuff like that, but it does well enough basically to like do what it needs to, so it's laudable. That's all I really need to say about it. It does its job. It's not like mediocre or anything like that. It's just like where it is. All right, GDI's airstrike. That'll go to excellent. So GDI's airstrike is like a very powerful weapon when it's basically used in a single player game, and when you basically like have like several like planes basically come out to play, it's just devastating to like where it basically hits. You can basically take out like construction yards, refineries, anything really with like a proper airstrike. So yeah, it's a very powerful weapon. It's also very useful against like infantry, and when the AI uses it, they can also retarget your like units. So there's that going for it too. I'll note by the way as well, if the enemy basically has like sort of any anti-air defense against it, it's just going to say like meh whatever to it, and it's like just pass through it and like do its job and get out of there. So yeah, really powerful unit. Nothing really to say other than that. It's like a super powerful weapon. So yeah. And then there's a nuke strike. Nuclear missile approaching. Fantastic. Now, I'll note that the nuke is basically one-time superpower to not basically build, but damage to do a lot of damage when you basically place it right. If you basically have like an enemy that's like got a very clustered base, you can wipe out like so much of their base basically all at once. I'll note that say like Blackout, it's very possible to blow up say like all their production facilities all at once, and like sort of like basically end the game right there. You just have to clean up after that, and there's basically a lot of other missions like that as well. So if you know where to basically place a nuke missile, you'll basically like sort of win the fight very very easily. Its only downside effect basically is that it's sort of like one-time use. So if you like need to use it again after that, it's just not gonna be useful. But basically you only want to like use like a super weapon basically more like once basically or maybe twice. So it's got a little drawback, but for what basically it's worth, it's basically worth like using once, and that's fine. I think it needs to have like a significant drawback for what it basically does. Alright, so there's basically a rank of like all of the units basically in Tiberian Dawn. I'll basically go through Red Alert at some point, but that's good enough here for now, so we'll save this as DFuxa's C&C Tiberian Dawn all units ranked. And my complete ranking of all the NOD and GDI buildable units in the original Command & Conquer. Buildable? Constructible. Apparently that's still not right, but whatever. Producible. Well, you get the idea. Alright, well, that's basically it for this one. I'll see you guys when I basically get to the next one. Take care.